That was fun. I haven't heard that in a long, long time. Like, way too long, right?
It's good to hear it again.
Yeah. So, apologies for the long intro to everybody out there. Honestly, I did that for me just because, like, I haven't heard it in a while. And so when I was making the intro video today, I was like, I was feeling it. A little Ronald Jenkins, disorganized fun. So there are two things that I feel like we did right from the very, very get-go at the founding of Heavy Cardboard. Number one, we licensed that song or his music, Ronald Jenkins' music, which he's amazing. And it was cheap and he was down for it. And that was awesome. So we licensed that before the very first episode. The second thing is we figured out the name Heavy Cardboard. We toyed around with the idea of weighted cardboard. No, I just didn't know. Yeah, I know. No, I hear you. I mean, you're shaking your head. I hear you. But yeah. So anyway, so getting back into the vibe of everything. So yeah, this is it. So I got to do the stuff for like the podcast editing stuff. So again, we're live both on Twitch and YouTube. So hi, everybody out there. Yeah, let me take care of the podcast specific stuff, and then we'll actually get into the show.
Right.
All right,
Okay.
Here we go. All right. Yeah, I'll do it afterwards. All right. All right. Episode 1. Really? I forgot the name of the show. And this is why, I work better normally live than I do recorded. But anyway, I digress. All right. Heavy Cardboard, episode 163. On the coattails of brass. Coming to you from Mayberry, USA. Welcome to Heavy Cardboard, where we talk medium and heavy strategy board games, war games, 18xx, and other related topics in the board gaming hobby. We're your hosts. I'm Edward.
And I'm Martin.
All right, so I don't know which is the bigger blame for the podcast but you know what I mean, for it coming back. Was it you or was it Nucleum?
Well, I'll take whatever credit I can get. But you said after we played Nucleum that you wanted to talk more about it and that you wanted to do it on the podcast would be the best venue for that. And I just said, well, let's do it then.
And here we are. Now, the only downside is I don't have a regular co-host, right? Because you're not going to do this every week or every 2 weeks.
I can do it whenever you need to. I mean, I'm happy to drop in here.
I hear you, but I promise you after... It's going to be consistent. I don't know how often. Like my guess is probably every fortnight is my guess. But anyway, I was super nervous coming into this today. Like I used to have to take a shot of like something, whether it's whiskey, vodka, Cuervo, whatever, before the show to chill. I actually had to do that tonight for the first time in memory. Like it's been years. Now, granted, going live, I don't know if doing this live in front of the audience added to it or it was just the fact that I was nervous about doing the podcast again. I don't know, but it's weird.
It's curious because, I mean, we do videos all the time. And yes, you are nervous for the videos as well.
But not to that level.
But you seem more nervous.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, who knows? Anyway, I feel like the expectation, the podcast. And so maybe I feel like that's it. But it's just two friends talking shop. That's it, right?
You just look behind Edward there and you see his Golden Geek Award for the podcast. You know, it's just... Not that many podcasts to get Golden Geek Awards. So,
I guess so. Yeah, you would think, but it doesn't make it. I mean, but that's a good sign because the more nervous I am, it tends to be the better a given show, whether it's the live streams or or whatnot.
Well, I mean, I hear you. I mean, I suffered a lot from that when doing the public speaking in the software stuff, and I gave up that a couple of years ago, and my life is hugely better because I don't have to go and give talks anymore.
Now, what makes that better?
Because I no longer have the days of dreading it before I do it, the panic attacks that come before I go on stage.
Wait, seriously?
And then once I'm on stage and rolling, it's fine.
Yeah,
adrenaline kicks in, a roar in, but then afterwards you get that adrenaline crash, and you go, ugh. And often you have to talk to people afterwards as well and pretend you're sociable and that kind of thing. And it was always a huge thing, and there are things I miss about it because I miss people that I meet from traveling around. 'Cause, I mean, I've traveled on work trips twice this whole year or something, when before it would be pretty much every month.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I remember the one that sticks out in my head is I think there was a company that brought you out to Australia for
Right.
like a 30-minute talk,
Yeah.
and that's
Exactly.
that's insane.
It is, but that's what they wanted to do, and who knows, they may still want to do it, but tough, because I've retired.
But you're Martin Fowler. I mean,
Yep.
it cracks me up whenever we're doing live streams and people's worlds come together for the first time, and they're like, "Oh, I didn't realize it was that Martin Fowler." And I'm like, "He's just a
Yep.
fellow nerd that likes playing board games."
Exactly.
But you're kind of a big deal out there in the real world. Now, you talked about having to act like you're sociable,
Mm-hmm.
and that kind of rolls into this past weekend. That what is today? Tuesday. Yeah, we're recording this on Tuesday, November 4th. Yeah, 14th. Nailed it. Lobster Trap just finished here in town. Lobster Trap is another invite-only local convention that's literally 6 minutes from here, which
Yep.
makes it maybe 15 minutes from where
Exactly.
you live. And it's hosted by some good friends of ours, and it's about the size of HeavyCon, maybe a little bit bigger, whatever. Every time I wanted to go to it, or I thought, let me rephrase that. Every time I considered going to the convention, I got a badge, the whole 9 yards, and it's right down the street. I just couldn't. I just couldn't bring myself to go, which I found strange to some degree. And you were talking about when you got here tonight, how you're like, conventions really aren't my thing.
Yeah, I mean, it was weird because I was really looking forward to it, because I mean, I had a great time at HeavyCon, and I thought, oh great, I'll get to do some, and also I like trying to build up relationships with more of the local board gamers.
Sure.
But then you get there and you're just in this big sea of people who you don't know, and you're kind of looking around. You know, it's in between games, and you're looking at this big sea of games, looking at other people looking at games, going, do they really want to play a game? And what kind of game is it going to be? And I don't know. And I just feel totally out of place, was how I felt. And I mean, I went a couple of days, and then I actually went, no, I can't do this anymore. And I came back home, and I was actually thinking of coming and joining you lot on Sunday, but you got this big epic 6-player game going, so I thought, no, I don't want to crash that. So I went out for a nice walk instead, and I didn't go back.
Funny thing, we played Eastern Empires, which is Mega Civ cut in half,
Right.
basically. So we had room. But I digress. But yeah, you had mentioned that you were surprised that I couldn't get the oomph to go to Lobster Trap. Now, I like everybody that puts it on.
Yep.
Craig, Derek, Scott, all those people that are associated with that whole thing. They're all genuinely really good
Super.
people. But I couldn't go. And you had mentioned how, well, it should be easy for you because you're an extrovert. So Jess and I had this conversation about being an extrovert, introvert, because she's very much an introvert, right? Your typical, whatever that represents. I don't take umbrage with it because I get what people are trying to say. But what I realized is I don't know that there's a distinction between an introvert and an extrovert in the way that people think of it. An extrovert, oh, you're very gregarious. It's easy to meet people. You're always being able to start conversations and all that. Sure, I can do that. I think what it is I just have a higher threshold before I get to a point to where I'm like, I can't be around people. And see, people don't see that side of me because whenever I get to that, I'm not around.
Right.
But because I used to go to a lot of conventions and I run the show in the whole 9 yards, I almost feel like it's dropping. Like my threshold is getting lower and lower. And so I think it's a bit of a misnomer, the whole introvert extrovert thing. And maybe it's a distinction without a difference. But to me, I got to be in the right headspace, and I'm not always in the right headspace. And so I was going to go to, there were 2 different times where I was like, oh, I guess no, I can't be around, and it's new people, right?
Yes.
It's like if it had been all the normal people that we game with either on the regular or on occasion, I'd be fine with that because I know them and I know how they play, and I know like Dan's going to be our resident, grumble. But and like Derek's going to be happy go lucky, whatever, dude. But the new people, and then I feel like I have to be on because, oh, you're heavy cardboard. And I just couldn't do it. And I feel like I let Derek down by not showing up much. I showed up one time, but I just couldn't. So
Yeah, and I totally empathize with that because I mean that's how I was professionally as well. I mean, you go to events and you're expected to be the gregarious one simply because you're the well-known name, and of course it's completely the opposite. It got noticeably worse as I got older, so that may be kicking in as well. And of course it's not a binary thing, right? And it is very definitely a difference between people you don't know and people you do.
yeah,
I mean, I wanted to go to Lobster Trap, hang out with people I do know who I don't see often enough in the sort of New England gaming community. But then I see all of these people I don't know, and immediately I'm beginning to freeze up. And I mean, once you get into a game, it's not so bad,
right.
but then the games are hit and miss, right? I mean, I played half a dozen games, and I would say there's only one that I really enjoyed. So
Interesting. And I'm curious, were any of these your suggestions of the
No.
new ones? No.
And that was another thing. I did think afterwards that maybe what I should have just done was gone up with a couple of boxes of Age of Steam, plunked myself on a table with a players wanted sign and waited for someone to come and join me. Because at least that way the game would be one I knew and liked. And in fact, one of the best things I had was actually when I strode up to a table, there were 3 people poring over the rules to Nucleum. And I just sat down and taught them the game, and then sat with them as they played the first few rounds. Because I've played Nucleum several times, I thought, well, I haven't really thought about how to teach this. Well, I'm sure I can get through it, and I did. And that was kind of fun. But I mean, it needs a bit of, it's the trying to start the conversation thing is always a tricky bit. And then also as you're playing for a while, you kind of also I feel I don't know how these people react, and I'm definitely aware I'm talking to people I don't know, and it always raises stress levels for me, I find.
You said something there that really kind of struck a chord is as I get older, I mean, I'm 48 now. Now, by no means old, unless according to Jess I am, but let's not go here. Yeah, as I'm getting older, I'm noticing that I'm less willing, and this is going to sound so, I don't know what the term is here, so you can help me with this, but I have endured enough bad teachers of games. It's a treat when I don't have to teach a game, right? Because, I mean, obviously. Right. But I have endured so many when it hasn't been me teaching games that they're just so poor at it. And I'm sure they're trying their hardest. I'm sure they're doing their best. Nobody wants to not teach a game well. But a lot of people just really aren't good at it. And that doesn't exactly enhance the experience.
Right.
With these new people. And you don't want to be a douche canoe and be that person, right? And I don't want to overstep and try and take over. And so you just endure it and you put on a brave face and, oh, God. Yeah, I just couldn't. So anyway, I found that interesting, though. Yeah. That kind of... So I feel bad about it, but on the other hand, oh, well. I mean, if I wasn't going to be comfortable, then that doesn't help anybody, right?
Yeah, that's. I mean, I was there for bits. I played a few games, but at some point, the level of uncomfortableness just went up to a certain point, and I thought, okay, I'm going. And then I didn't go back the last day because I thought, hey, no, I'm done with that. That's also a good reminder to me if ever I'm tempted to go to any other kind of board game convention. That no, it's probably an exception rather than the rule, and HeavyCon was an exception, and that's interesting. Why is it I didn't feel like that at HeavyCon? I don't know. Maybe there was just enough familiar faces that it kind of reached some kind of critical mass of familiarity. Because, of course, a number of people are familiar on the Slack channels and things like that. So that maybe makes it a little less all new people. I don't know. Maybe it's because the games we're playing tend to be longer and therefore there's less of that what game shall we play next game, which is our least favorite game.
Boy, is it.
I don't know what it is, but there's some mix of those things. And my wife, Cindy, felt the same way about both of those things. She really enjoyed HeavyCon and didn't enjoy and felt, again, out of place at Lobster Trap. For no fault of the organisers, and I want to stress that. They're Craig, Derek, Scott, etc., they're lovely people. And I would like to hang out with them more. But unfortunately, big events like that and me just don't get on.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned this with HeavyCon, and I feel differently as well about when it comes to HeavyCon. Obviously, I have a vested interest in it, and ironically, HeavyCon invites just started going out for HeavyCon 7 last night, so that was kind of cool. And then it's funny. So my time schedule, like my sleep schedule and everything is just way off right now. And so I'm doing this, and I'm pinging people on Slack and all this. And I look down and it's like 11 o'clock midnight. And I'm like, I am so sorry to have bothered y'all. Because, you know, when you can't put at channel stuff on Do Not Disturb, it comes through. So I'm all worried that like I woke somebody up at 5 in the morning over in Europe. I'm like, I am so sorry. Anyway, so it was cool though that is out, and now we're back to a quote unquote normal year, if you will, for it. So looking forward to that. Poker's been a mixed bag for me, but it's good to be back at it. You know, it feels like, I know it hasn't been that long, but it feels like recording the podcast has been like pre-pandemic almost. It feels like it's been so long. I know it hasn't been quite that long, but yeah, it's nice to be back at it. So this is cool. By the way, it's funny I mentioned that whole, oh, you're that Martin Fowler. Apparently just had somebody put 2 and 2 together in chat right now. So that cracks me up. That's awesome. And I will say, like, one of the cool things, like, I only knew you because, or of who you were, because obviously I don't run in that world, but because you had a blue check mark on Twitter. And I was like, oh, who's this? Whoa, he's got a wiki. Wow, you're a really big dude, or, you know, a big deal and stuff. And the thing that I am forever in your debt for was how to deal with the internet that sucks. And so you were an amazing resource, I guess, or like sounding board on that and how to help. So I really appreciate that. But now he's just Martin. He's just a geek that likes playing games with us.
Exactly.
So, anyway. All right. So speaking of which, I mean, we're talking board games, so that's cool.
Yep.
We're going to follow kind of the old concept of the podcast to some degree, loosely. So talking about what we've been playing, I'm going to start with Mr. President. Look, I haven't played it in, I don't know, about a month or so since we streamed a week of it. That was my number one most anticipated game of all time, and it not only lived up to, but surpassed expectations, which I don't know how it succeeded in doing that. That surprises the hell out of me, to be honest, because to have expectations that high and it meets it or exceeds it, that was awesome. That was such an amazing experience. And here I am now, ever since having played that a bunch, I'm judging other games compared to it, even if they have absolutely nothing in common with it. But Mr. President was such a wonderful experience that I had, both playing it by myself as well as kind of co-op solo with James, that and this kind of ties into the whole meat of the podcast today is, would I rather be playing this or Mr. President?
Right.
And a lot of games are falling short of that. But that's not really fair when it's your most anticipated game and it hit, right? So I feel like I'm doing a bit of a disservice to some of the other games. But at the same time, you like what you like, play what you dig, that type stuff. And yeah, Mr. President is all that in a bag of chips for me. I'm not going to go into details about it because I did 7 entire weeks of podcasts or live streams of it. I imagine most folks watched it. And if not, it's a solo only game that it takes about 2 hours per turn. Each turn has 50 steps. You're playing out the 4 years of being a president, and each turn is a
Right.
year, and so basically it has 200 steps in it, and it takes about 8 to 10 hours, easy to do that, if not more. And it was an amazing, wonderful experience, and I can't wait for the second edition to come out, which just revises some things and cleans up a little bit here or there. Completely playable, the first edition, but all that's going to do is give me an excuse to get it back onto the table when it comes out with the second edition in the first quarter of 2024. So I can't wait. I know that's not your bag because solo.
Yep.
I understand,
Yeah,
but
I never do solo games.
I'm so okay. I'm not glad that the pandemic happened, but one of the silver linings of the pandemic was it really got me into solo games, right? So I could stream stuff,
Right.
and I'm so glad that I did. I love the experience for a lot of them. Some, looking at you on Mars Nucleum, not so much.
Yeah, picking a game off recent games that I picked up, I thought I might mention Princess of Florence, an old classic game by Kramer and Ulrich, back from 2000. I played it a couple of months ago here, actually. I think Dan brought it out. It was a rare game that Dan said he kind of liked, which is always a bit of a shocker when Dan likes a game.
Hold on, yeah, he's the local curmudgeon, and he knows it, and he's really cool about it, and he owns it, and he leans into it, and the whole 9 yards. So if a game is fine, it's perfectly cromulent. But to say that Dan likes a game, that's high praise.
I'm not sure I'd go as far as to say likes, but I mean as close to likes as you could imagine.
Okay,
Dan
fair
getting,
enough,
right?
fair enough.
So, and it is a classic game. It was interesting to play it. It's not a game that I'd leap out and grab, but the reason I thought I'd bring it up is because it also and it will play a little bit into some of our discussion later, I suspect. It was the subject of a particularly interesting review. I think it was the review was originally written for some board game magazine back in the mid 2000s.
Okay,
and
forever ago, right? Yeah.
And you can find it on Board Game Geek because somebody copied it over because it is quite the review. The review is entitled "The Game That Ruined Eurogames," and this rather hyperbolic review basically says this was the game that set Eurogames down a direction into the hell of modern Eurogames. And again, we're talking about mid 2000s, right? And his point is it started things like a fascination with themes of Renaissance Europe, very beige board design, and also a lot of stuff going on personal player boards as opposed to a shared board. Because in Princess of Florence, the only real interaction you have with other people is an auction at the beginning, where you're getting bits that you put on your personal player board, and then you can sort of combine what you have on your personal player board and the cards in your hand to score points. There's not a huge amount of interaction in that game. And he said, in the review, basically saying, well, then we saw the leap of games following that, Puerto Rico, etc., that kind of continued to go down that track. Well, I think Puerto Rico has a good bit more interaction than Princess of Florence. And it's an interesting tack because it has also brought this broader sort of thing that happened. If you find that post, and you have to search on Board Game Geek for the game that ruined Eurogames or something like that, and you'll discover it. There's this huge long discussion thread afterwards, which is actually quite an interesting discussion thread, odd enough to say for an internet discussion thread, but it is actually quite good. But it's also the seed of what is now a movement in some circles in board gaming, sometimes referred to as the OG or original German movement. And the idea is to say, board games took this direction away from the 90s German Euro games and ended up heading off in this different direction. And there's an OG guild on Board Game Geeks that goes back to say what makes a game that's more of the style of that original German style that we'd like to see more of. And to sum up some of the things, I think one of the most important elements of this is the actions occurring on a common board where you're all interacting. It's not happening on your player board, so it's much more heads up rather than heads down, greater degree of interaction. Also lighter rules, because it moves against a lot of the sort of more complex rules that we get in the modern board games. And then there's still quite a lot of things that they'll bring out. Knizia games are very, very popular in that OG area, etc. But it's an interesting way of thinking about the way the modern board game world developed in the last 20 years or so. And Princess of Florence was arbitrarily kind of picked on as this, here's the game that launched this in this wrong direction, as this guy put out of it. But it's an interesting thing to think about in terms of board game history.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm reading chat right now, and it says it might have been a Michael Barnes' article.
Michael Barnes, that was the name of the guy.
Who apparently got banned on BGG. Who knows why? But, grumpy old man. Who knows? I don't know. Yelling at clouds. But interesting, nonetheless. And the funny thing is, I am positive that I have played Princess of Florence. No recollection of it whatsoever. Like when you were talking about it, and I'm like, okay, I'm trying to remember. No, I got nothing. All that kept popping into my head was Lowenhertz, which is not. I get that. But that, like, I couldn't get, you know how you get it, like, now it's just stuck in my head, and I can't picture what it might have been. So I got nothing to add, but thank you for that.
Yeah, I thought you might find that interesting.
So, keeping on the solo/2-player kick, German in chat asked me a question that I thought was appropriate and fits here. I play video games. I don't like usually multiplayer video games. I only like solo video games like RPGs, stuff like that, or especially tactical RPGs and turn-based stuff, old school in that regard. But he asked, what motivates me to play a solo board game as opposed to a video game? And honestly, it comes down to two things, I think, and one of which would not apply to him. One is I have a show to run and I got to produce content. So there are times when y'all ain't available. And so I'm like, I got to do something. All right, let me bust out a solo of something. That's number one. Number two is sometimes I want it to be like, a video game, you're sitting down on the couch or in bed or in a chair, whatever, and you're just sitting there and you're not really moving. You're not really doing anything. You're engaging your brain and your eyes, but you're not moving at all. And I know, look, it's not like you're doing calisthenics while playing board games. I get it. But sometimes you just want to move pieces. And I want that tactile feel of a physical board game. That's why I don't like games on TTS or, for the most part, Board Game Arena and stuff. If I'm going to play a video game, I'm going to play a video game. I'm not going to play a video game adaptation of a board game.
Right.
If I'm going to do that, I'm going to play a board game, be it solo, multiplayer, whatever. So I think that's the distinction for me. So with that said, a 2-player game that recently got into was War of the Ring. So I don't know. Are you a Tolkien fan?
Well, I'm certainly familiar with Tolkien. Very familiar. Yeah.
No, I understand that you're familiar. That's not what I asked. I asked, are you a fan? Like, are you a, like, I've watched the movies. I've never read the books. I'm not going to poo-poo on it because God knows that's like 3 things that I would argue you can't really poo-poo. Would be Tolkien, that would be Star Trek, or Star Wars. None of which I'm really into.
Okay.
But it happens to be Kyle is a huge Tolkien fan. Maybe not to the level of, I can't think of the talk show host at night, that he has a encyclopedic memory and knowledge of all things Tolkien and Lord of the Rings universe. That ain't me. All I know is it's 3 movies about people walking. The end. But anyway, played it numerous times. 2-player game. I think it's Colbert, by the way. Stephen Colbert. Thank you,
okay.
Jake. Anyway, played 2 games of it so far. We're going to be playing a third of it this Friday. We're streaming it. And I got to say, for a 2-player war game, pretty good. And the theme comes through really, really well. One player plays as the Free Peoples. The other plays as, I don't know, the orcs and the shadow.
Sauron, probably.
That, yes, they are a portion of that. So basically, the Free Peoples are trying to dunk the ring in the volcano, and Sauron and company are trying to keep him from doing that. And there's a couple different ways that each player can win, and it just works really well. There's a lot of die rolls, there's card draws, stuff happens, but it makes for a really interesting game war game. Honestly, it's a 2-player war game, but with a fantasy theme that actually works really well, and I've really enjoyed it to my surprise. It's one of those kind of OG, really good, well thought of IP integration games, and yeah, I've really enjoyed my War of the Ring plays of it. I'm looking forward to Friday's stream of it. So,
Okay.
plus
Good.
paybacks, Kyle, paybacks.
So next on our list is a couple of games that we've done recently from talking about modern and more complex board games, Vinos and the Galerist from Vita Lacerda.
These are known good games.
Yes, two excellent games. So we played the Galerist. I'm not quite sure how we got into the Galerist. It kind of happened one day here at the game group, and suddenly, the Galerist, and I was kind of, I'd love to play that. I haven't played it in ages. In fact, it had been horribly long since I'd played it, and it was really good to get back into the swing of it. And then I'd never played Vinos, and so it was nice to try that out. So I got a chance to play that, and hopefully we'll be streaming that soon as well. And and as you'll hear or have heard, I tend to not like a lot of the directions that are sort of the ruination of Eurogames directions from post Princes of Florence, if you follow that track. But one area I do like in more complex is Vita Lacerda's games, and both Galerist and Vinos both fit into that category.
As I continue in this hobby, now going on over a decade, which is not long compared to a lot of folks, but I'm split on Vital's games. Some I like more than others. What I'm learning is I enjoy procedural games. If it's going to have a lot of steps, as long as the steps are clearly laid out and defined, I'm good with that, right? Like, okay, on your turn, you do A through Q. I'm good with that as long as I have a step-by-step thing to tell me so that I don't forget K and F.
Right.
Some of his the games that I enjoy the most of his either have that limited. It's not, you take your turn and then you do this, which then leads to this, and hey, don't forget about this over there. And some of his games of late are doing that. I don't like those as much as the Galerist and Vinos, which limit that, and it's all about those really chunky, tasty, meaty decisions that I feel like those are classics, in my opinion. They're just really, really good. And you can never do as much as you want to, so it's all about maximizing squeezing every drop out of every action without going so deep that you're APing into oblivion and min-maxing everything because you can't see everything that's going to happen.
Right.
And these are two that are just great. And the Galerist is great solo. It is a super simple bot to run, which is fantastic.
Yeah, I also like there's usually a bit of symbiotic collaboration in Lacerda's games. Not a huge amount, but just a little bit. Like in the Galerist, if you can find somebody else who's got the same artist, therefore you can both bump them up together, that kind of thing that comes through. And the battle after pulling visitors into your galleries, always got to keep an eye on what other people are pushing after, what you think you can get hold of. There's some nice little interactions there. And
anticipating kick-out actions, right?
Yes.
In the Galerist, like, I think you're going to go do this, so I'm going to actually go there. So you kick me out and I get bonus actions. Yay.
Right. Yeah, and that all works well. Vinos, I said I only played it once, so I got less of a feel for that, but I definitely found, again, a similar vibe with that. And also, Vinos doesn't have any of these multi-step actions, which is what you don't like about Lacerda. And Galerist has a couple that kind of, I've got to remember to send the visitor out when they go to the international market. Of the later ones, I haven't played them as much. I've played Lisboa quite a lot because I have it. I got it partly because of watching Heavy Cardboard. But the later ones I've only really played for streaming. I did enjoy the last one, Inventions. There was less of the multi-step, but it was more of a sequencing. It was more like, I want to do this action, which I could do, but it would be much better to do that action and then that other action that then kicks this action, which then I'll get another one as well. that sequencing, once I realized that that was really the key to the game, that was really quite interesting.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. And I mean, the one that comes to mind the most, haven't played it since we streamed it, I think, is Weather Machine. And there are 78 different steps that I feel like in oh yeah,
Right.
and oh yeah, and oh yeah. And I enjoyed my plays of it, but here's the kicker. That type of game, I'm not looking to play, so I'm not going to I'm not going to be like, ooh, you know what we should play? That. Whereas something like an Inventions or a Venus or the Galerist, yeah, I'm down for that. Let's play that. That type thing. And that's kind of where I draw the line.
Right.
So, yeah, is what it is. Quickly, Furnace with Interbellum. Yeah, it's the expansion for Furnace. Furnace does an amazing job of taking one or two mechanisms, which is you run an engine, it's an input-output engine with a really good auction. Okay? Very, very simple game that is surprisingly deep for it. Interbellum just makes it better. So, win. I really like both Furnace and the expansion. And to be honest with you, I don't see a reason I would ever not play. If I'm going to play Furnace, playing it with Interbellum is just a win across the board. It takes two very simple things that I like, which is resource conversion in an auction, and does it really well, and does it in a really relatively tight time frame. Win. Just across. There is nothing superfluous here. It's just, and it knows what it is.
Yeah.
And love it. Absolutely love it. Huge
I've
fan.
not played it with the expansion. I quite liked the original Furnace. I think I sort of liked it after I played it, but it kind of faded from memory fairly quickly, like a lot of games do.
Well, I mean, we churn through them, right?
Yeah.
So to be fair, but yeah, I could see that getting played again at a game day because, an hour with Interbellum, maybe an hour 15 with 4 people once you get rolling.
Right.
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, I remember the auction being really good, particularly the way you often want to bid in an auction and not win it.
And this does that and just adds more to it. But the overhead for the more to it isn't bad. So it's just more of the things you like.
Yeah, the things I didn't appreciate so much didn't like so much with Furnace was, well, after you've got all your bits, you've got to go through this process of converting this to that and this to that, and it's all that then you're all heads down, and I kind of found that a little bit tedious.
Which is fair, and kind of look, it's apples and giraffes here, the comparison I'm about to make, but what you just said, like, okay, you like the front end, you don't like the kind of the operations part. I'm going to get shunned by the community for saying this, but honestly, that's why I'm not super keen on Indonesia, which is one of the Grail games of Splotter. I love the way running the companies works and all of that. I hate the operations aspect because it just feels tedious. And that's one of the things that I'm not super keen on Food Chain Magnate is, okay, all the meaningful decisions have been made. Now we're just going to run it and see how it plays out. And that's kind of how the operations works in Indonesia. Right. So I'm not super keen on that. But anyway. So speaking of games that not super keen on.
Yeah, I was thinking, I mean, I did go to Lobster Trap and played half a dozen games. And one game we'll mention a bit later is one I really like. But I thought I should mention more than one. So I picking out one that I was much more meh about was Barcelona, which is one of the recent games. You've played it up on the streams, yeah?
It's fine. It's a game on a pile of games.
Yeah, I mean, when I was playing it, really just struck me that this is the game for, if you feel that your point salad games really need a lot more lettuce. Preferably iceberg lettuce, the stuff that's got no taste. And it was that kind of game. I thought, how on earth could this be anything be more point salad than this thing?
It's one of those that you get points for spelling your name correctly.
Yeah.
I make the joke about that, right, with a lot of Felds and such.
Yeah, and it was just really, yeah. I mean, it's hard to say too much, and I don't really want to say too much about those many games that I wasn't very keen on. But that was, I think, an example of this. And again, this will be a theme that will come back. when there's so many different ways to score in a game, it loses a lot of the focus of the game. And there was kind of a focus in the grid and laying things out on the grid, but the fact that you got so many different actions that were triggered by what you're going on with the grid and so many different things directions you can go to get points, that doesn't jive well with me, I think. And it's definitely one of the signs of when I'm put off by a game is how many ways are there to score. I remember when we played Horseless Carriage, one of the things I really loved about Horseless Carriage is there's only one way to score. You sell cars. The end.
You know sell, you know score.
Yep.
Very simple. Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, I remember playing it and it being fine. And yeah, we'll get there here in a minute. Last two, I guess. I'll mention Fields of Despair briefly. Another 2-player war game set in World War I. It's a block war game, which I love block war games. It adds in that fog of war. So you see that there's blocks. You don't know the size of that army. So dig that. And it's basically the Western Front in World War I. And you play it before the trench warfare begins, and then you can play the full game, which is where the trench warfare then takes place, which I realize doesn't sound incredibly enticing because, hey, get out of the trench, get killed. Next guy, get out of the trench, get killed, because that's how it was in World War I. Not trying to be flippant about that, just saying. But the lead up to it I thought was really interesting. There are different scenarios that breaks down the initial push and the kind of blitzkrieg, if you will, that happened at the very beginning of World War I. And it was really, really interesting to play, and it's one that I want to go and revisit. Kyle and I had a lot of fun playing it. So, yeah, Fields of Despair. Really enjoyable. Hey, this just in. Block war games, usually good. I've yet to play a block war game that I didn't enjoy across the board, regardless of the setting. So, there's that. Again, I know war games and 2-player usually not really your
Well, yes
bag.
and no. I mean, I'm actually there is a large part of me that would really like to get back into war games because when I started playing
what you cut your teeth on.
well, back in the 70s and 80s, it was Dice Encounter war games, and I played a lot of those.
Avalon Hill to the rescue.
Yeah, well, not just exactly. But I mean, the main reason I don't is because I don't have enough time to spend playing the games that I know about and want to play anyway. So going down the rabbit hole of war games, even though I hear somebody talk about something like Nevsky, and I think, oh, that does sound really interesting. But then I go, no, I'm just never going to have time to do this kind of thing. So I need to draw some lines somewhere and keep myself away.
It's funny you mentioned a game like Nevsky in that whole series. The problem with it, not problem. Yeah, okay. The impediment to getting these games played is there is a high barrier to entry with the rules of these that it just makes it, if you are a war gamer by nature and you are, consistently playing these types of games, that barrier isn't as high. But even your hardest Euro is nowhere near the rules overhead and the complexity there of a war game. That's why I always make the comment that war game complexity and everything else need to be on 2 different scales.
Yep.
A 3.0 in Euros, whatever, that's fine. A 3.0 in a war game, you got some work cut out for you to understand and learn that game. One of my most anticipated games that I have wanted to play since, I started in the hobby, is still unplayed. D-Day at Omaha Beach. It is supposed to be arguably the best solo game ever made, especially for war gamers. But whoo boy, getting that started is a biggie. And I just gotta do it. But it's the investment of time and effort. Is the juice worth the squeeze?
Yeah.
I don't know. And I feel like Nevsky kind of falls in that realm.
Who knows? As I said, I've drawn that line, so I won't be crossing it.
Fair enough. Let's see. Concordia Venus. We'll roll into that. I don't like Concordia. I don't know why. I think it's just I look, I'm supposed to be able to clearly give reasons and thoughts as to why I like or don't like something because, hey, I talk about and show off board games for a living. I can't. I can't figure out what it's me, not you, Concordia. I understand this. However, I had a blast playing Concordia Venus.
This is the partnership style of Concordia.
Which, boy, that flies in the face of everything that I... Not big on co-ops.
It's not a co-op.
It's a team game.
Partnership. It's a partnership game. It's definitely very different to a co-op.
So, yeah, 4 players playing 2v2, and I loved it. Absolutely loved it. I would love to get it to the table again. I had a blast. I think it'd be fun to play 2v2v2.
Oh, yeah, that's the one time I've played the partnership Concordia. It was actually on the Sunday at Lobster Trap the previous year, and it was all with, folks, the local folks that I knew. And we had a great time. And it was, 6-player Concordia, 2v2v2, and it was a really great game. And I really like it because partnership games are so rare in the board gaming world. And yet, again, when I go back to me playing games in the 70s and 80s, I played a huge amount of bridge, which is, of course, a partnership game. Lots of other partnership card games that are out there that I played with. So I'm very used to partnership games. But in the board game field, those are vanishingly rare. And Concordia does an excellent job, and I'm really pleased that gives us an interesting partnership option.
Yeah, agreed. I would have never guessed that the difference between Concordia and Venus, again, the partnership aspect, somehow just works. And I've given it a lot of thought, and I can't put my finger on what doesn't work and what makes it work. And it's
interesting you say that because I remember we had this conversation on a previous podcast where you actually asked me, what is it you like about Concordia? And I didn't really give an answer that satisfied me very much, and I thought about it afterwards. And I've been thinking about it since, and I think what is interesting about Concordia, again, it comes down to this symbiotic relationship, and it has to do with the prefect action by which you get resources in Concordia. Because in Concordia, you place your houses on various cities around the map, and the map is divided into regions. When you want to get resources, you pick a region, and you say Britannia or whatever, or Italia, produces. Then everybody who's got houses in that region gets some goods. And that leads to some very interesting decisions. When you choose which province to produce, do I produce the province that produces a lot for me, or do I produce the province that produces a little bit less for me but doesn't give Edward anything? Similarly, when building houses, do I look to maximize into one province so I get a really big haul when I call, or do I go into that province that Edward's got a lot of stuff in so that every time he produces in that province I get a little bit of stuff on the side?
A little taste.
Yeah.
Just a taste.
And that decision about what to produce, where to build, and taking into account the fact that you've got these symbiotic production efforts of the prefect, that I think is what gives Concordia, that's one part of what makes Concordia magical for me.
And ironically, I think that's only magnified in Venus, because then it becomes, oh, my partner also gets the benefit. Like, again, the same calculation is going on, but even more so now, because it's one of those, do I also get stuff that will help my partner, but it's also going to help the other team more, and it's just elevated that much more, and it just works so well. Really well done.
And I'll now talk about the game that I played at Lobster Trap that I really enjoyed, which I'd actually played before, and in fact it has a special role in my life at Heavy Cardboard, because the game is Big Boss.
I've never played this game, and I know
you have.
Have I?
It's because it got re-implemented as Chartered. And that was the first game I played in this room.
Oh, really? Is it?
Yeah, and the first game I streamed was Chartered.
Okay.
So
it's kind of like oh God, it starts with an A. It's
Acquire.
Thank you. That's it.
Yes, always likened to Acquire, which I'm less familiar with because I played Acquire once many years ago, and I can't remember it super well.
See, I can remember Acquire. I can't remember Big Boss, but I can remember Chartered. Okay.
I mean, the basic thing with Big Boss, and Big Boss has this interesting history because it came out and then disappeared, and it was changing hands to coming like $200 on the geek market. Chartered came out, had a bit of a splash, and then disappeared. And now Big Boss is available, and you just get it off Amazon for $30 or something. It's been, it's a fairly mass market toy company, Funko, that has produced it, and so it's easy to get hold of. And the nature of the game, it's basically a stock and share game. You have this. Essentially a big loop that's kind of squashed up into shape on the map of 72 squares, all in a big circle. And you have cards that correspond, one card per square. And you play a card and you can build a little bit of a company on that board. And then as the companies build, you also buy shares in the company. So just because you start a company doesn't mean that you're going to necessarily be the major shareholder. You can buy shares of any company when you put stuff out there. So people are buying shares, trying to predict which companies will grow. And the particularly interesting thing is when two companies touch each other, then the bigger company takes over the smaller one, and whoever is in the biggest company gets a big payout on their shares when they do that. So a lot of the game is trying to figure out which companies do I think are going to grow, which ones are going to swallow up the other ones first, how can I manipulate things so that one company swallows up the one that I haven't got shares in. And although it's quite abstract, it's a really interesting game. Also, very simple rules, very easy to teach, plays quite snappily, and it plays 6 players, which is a very nice player count. There's not many games that are kind of snappy 6-player games that are interesting to play.
Looking at you, Medici.
Yep, Medici is the go for game, and that's why as soon as Joe Huber brought it over to my house when I was hosting one time, and I saw it and I played it once again, and I thought insta-buy, and I just went straight to the online and I bought it because for me a game that good that plays 6. That's that interesting, and I've really enjoyed all my plays of it. So, strong recommendation to take a look at that. And we ought to stream it, actually, to show people what it's like, because it's a cracking game.
Let's make it happen. That sounds good. Just circle back one thing. Some folks in chat are bringing up Bonaparte and Marengo and Napoleon's Triumph. Funny they mentioned that. Kyle and I, now that we're finishing up with we're kind of working our way through just 2-player stuff. And so it's like Ken has some availability to where he and I can do some 2-player stuff. And Kyle has some availability like every other Friday. We can do some 2-player stuff. Whenever 2-player stuff comes up, just gravitate towards war games, because it's really hard, to get them played at a regular game day, because it's an investment. And 2-player, you don't go to a game day to play 2-player games. So that seems to be the logical place to do those. And I actually brought up Napoleon's Triumph, but I have heard that is a beast to learn. Again, there's that barrier to entry. Look, we're heavy cardboard here. I'll do it. And I think I can do it pretty well, but it eats up the time that could be dedicated to other games. So just keep that in mind when I consider, if I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this game, well, there's that week, that type thing. Because not only do you have to read through the rule book, but then you got to parse it in the whole 9. You get the idea. So anyway, figure I mentioned that. The last one, we'll let you're going to be more gentle about this than I will. Part of the impetus for the podcast, as we talked about, was our plays of Nucleum and where it falls in regards to other board games that it pulls from. When I learned Nucleum, I learned it at the Gathering of Friends as a prototype that I wasn't allowed to talk about with David Terzi himself and a couple other players. Now, keep in mind, I originally learned the game. We sat down to play it at midnight. Probably not a wise choice on my end. Mm-hmm. Number 2, sat down to learn it at 4 players. And number 3, one of those players was all about making sure he was trying to win the game, which I'm just trying to learn the game. Like, look, I'm all about, sure, try and win, but not to that degree. So all those things were working against it. And so after playing it, I was like, I really have no interest. But then I was like, oh, let's play it again once it got published. We did, and I enjoyed it, but every play I've played since has been diminishing returns on that. David said Nucleum pulls from Brass, Barrage, and I think Concordia. Wow. Okay. And then makes it its own amalgamation. Well, we played it.
Yeah, and it kind of helped generate this whole podcast because it occurred to me that that comparison to Brass is something we hear a lot about a reasonable amount with different games. We've saw it with Nucleum. I remember Autobahn was billed as a cross between Brass and Concordia. And although I never heard anybody from the publisher or designer say this about Imperial Steam, lots of other people commented and said Imperial Steam has a strongly brassish quality to it. And that made me reflect on, well, maybe we should think a bit about, what makes a game, what is it that causes people to say this is kind of like Brass? Why is their appeal for this? And what is a game? What is the essence that makes people go for a game like Brass? So that's kind of feeding into much of what we're going to talk about in the rest of the podcast. Did you want to talk a bit more about Nucleum first before we go into that? Or
Honestly, no, because
Okay.
I and here's why. I think Nucleum itself can be its own podcast.
Yes. Could well be.
Yeah. So, hey, cliffhanger. Okay. So yeah, let's. So I mean, I think your intro there did it justice there.
Okay.
Yeah, it's funny. It's hard to not talk about these other games though when we're talking about Brass, in a sense that they so blatantly pull from, and some aspects maybe successfully, others maybe less so. And it's I can't help but think back when we were doing the roundtable on Nucleum. I actually wrote down in my notes, like while somebody was giving their thoughts, like this. I want to play this again as much as I want to play Imperial Steam, which means not at all. And yet they both have their roots in a game in Brass.
Right. Yeah, so I thought to start off, it might be worth thinking about why is it that people compare games to Brass? Either deliberately in order to say, oh, this cool new game I've got is kind of like Brass, or post hoc, like with Imperial Steam, where other people are saying, oh, this is kind of like Brass, isn't it? And I mean, it's worth saying a few things about the history of Brass, just briefly for those that don't know. So, Brass came out in 2007, 2008-ish.
2007, yeah. Yep.
Designed by Martin Wallace, published initially by his company, Warfrog, at the time. And Warfrog at the time, they would produce a game, sell, I think it was a standard print run of 3,000 or something like that, and then they'd never print it again. It was that kind of cycle.
It was small. Like, I have a couple of copies of some of the Warfrog games that are like number 4.
Right.
Of it. And yeah, they were very limited, and this is back in the day. Yep.
So it was generally small batch and usually one-off publications. But then Brass caught fire, and it got a lot of interest. It shot up the BGG rankings, and he then
Go ahead.
He then there was a period of contractual dispute between him and what is now Eagle Griffin Games, but caused it to be a bit dramatic for a while. But then the rights reverted purely to him around 2016 or so, and he hooks up with these couple of Canadians who had started a little board game company called Roxley, and there weren't even any full-time employees. They were that small at the time. I think they published one game or maybe 2 games, and they persuaded him to, hey, let's do a reprint of Brass. And in that conversation, he came up with the notion that he'd had a kind of variant game idea, which would, perhaps set in a different part of the country, in the Birmingham area, with beer.
Wait a minute. Martin Wallace thought of a variant for one of his own games? Mind blown. By the way, that's a joke, because he does riffs on all his games.
Yeah.
All of his games.
Yeah, which, I mean, and I think most designers do, to some degree.
Maybe not to that degree, but
Yeah.
Continue. Sorry,
Yeah.
just wanted to interject that. Go ahead.
Yeah, so Roxley then go out and they produce they had to change the name of the original Brass because now there were going to be two games, so they had to distinguish between them. So the way they distinguished was Brass Lancashire, which is the original game because it's set in Lancashire, and then Brass Birmingham because it's set in Birmingham. They produced the two games. They came out 2018 or so, and made a huge impact. And in fact, early this year, Brass Birmingham became the #1 game on Board Game Geek. And we can diss the board gaming rankings, reasonably so, but not many games have hit #1. When you look at that list of who's been a #1 game on Board Game Geek, you've got, I believe, Paths of Glory right at the beginning, then Puerto Rico, then Agricola, then Puerto Rico for a little bit longer, then Twilight Struggle, then Pandemic Legacy, Gloomhaven, and then Brass. That's a pretty exalted company.
That really is. I mean, because let's face it, when I first got into the hobby, I mean, you don't know anything for anything, and you're like, oh my God, look at all these games. So what do? You stumble on BGG, and then you see this. Oh, what are the best games? I mean, Twilight Struggle. That was the whole. That's how I wanted to get Twilight Struggles because it was the #1 game. It's got to be amazing, right? And yeah, this is, and I saw you had notes in here that it's currently number 20.
Brass Lancashire,
Yeah,
currently number 20. It's never been out of the top 40 in the rankings all the time since 2007. There's not many games in the top 50 that are as old as that. I mean, I think 2 other games, something like of that age, in the top 50. I mean, so Brass is significant because it's had longevity and a #1 game. So it's quite natural for people, I think, to want to draw comparisons to it, either promoting their work or in comparison after the fact. And I think that's a lot of why people want to say it's like Brass, is because because it's a game that's very familiar to lots of people and very highly regarded because it's been shooting so high up the rankings.
why? I mean, that's the obvious question, right? What is it about Brass? And now, when we talk about Brass, we're kind of leaning towards Brass Lancashire, but you could also Age of Steam's a system. I would argue that Brass is kind of a system in that regard. That Birmingham feels like Brass, but it's also its own game.
Right.
Age of Steam maps feel like Age of Steam, but they're their own maps. So I make that kind of comparison naturally, I feel like. So when we're talking about Brass, kind of interchangeably between them, even though they are very much distinct, their
Yes.
very own games. But there's enough similarity there that when we're talking about Brass, you could direct it either one of them.
Yeah, and I definitely see them as a common system that ties them together. So I had some thoughts about what makes them appealing. And the first thing I think is a particular form of network building that Brass has. Now, network building is, of course, a very common notion in board games. So we think of another
Ticket to Ride.
Yeah. Or now that's an interesting case. I almost want to park that to one side. I've got other thoughts on that.
Okay, all right.
But I mean, obviously, Age of Steam, right? The classic
course,
network. Any
sure.
train game pretty much has a strong network
Yes.
building element, and we like network building games. We
Absolutely.
enjoy Age of Steam. We enjoy cube rails, all that kind of stuff. The thing that's particularly interesting about Brass's particular twist, is that it's a network building game where the nodes are more primary than the links. In Age of Steam, it's all about the links. Yeah, you've got cities and cubes, you want to make the links to get the right cube to the right city, but you're really focusing on the links. In Brass, you do have some focus on the links, but you're also, perhaps more so, focusing on the nodes, because you can build up each town. Where do I put my coal mine? Where do I decide I want to arrange things so that I can get this cotton mill in the right kind of position? The nodes become much more energetic and interesting. And I think that's something that is particularly unique to Brass, is that emphasis on the nodes in the network. And a lot of the game is building up those nodes, and the links become valuable because of their relationships to the nodes.
I guess that makes a lot of sense. I never stopped to think about it in that respect. I was actually listening to Game Brain podcast on Brass Birmingham, actually, in the lead up to when I knew we were going to record this. And they brought up a really good point that this network building, and it just reminded me of the fact that it's obvious that the nodes are more important than the links, because at the midway point of the game, the links disappear. So of course, and I say that not as a duh, but I guess as a, I never really thought about it. But yeah, obviously it's got to be more important, because at the midway point, the canals go away and they become rail, or, open up the ability to now build links as railroads. So all the canals just vanish. So the links don't matter in that regard. They're a means to an end, not the end, like you said,
Right.
like they are in Age of Steam.
And to be fair, while the canal links are very definitely only means to an end, and good strategy that I hear of and seems to be from when I play is don't try to build canals unless you really need to. With rail, it is important to build rail links held for leather, because you get a lot of points from rail links. So there is a train rush at Brass. It's very different to the train rush of 18XX, obviously, but it is that rush of I've got to get as many rails out there as possible across the board. But even so, it's driven from the fact that you're connected to the nodes, because in the end, what rails are going to score is going to depend on what gets built up on the nodes around it. And yes, you can get a lot of points from trains, but you're not going to entirely win the game from trains. You're going to have to build up some nodes and get some node action going as well. And of course, in many places, you need the nodes to build the trains, because how else are you going to get the coal?
So my favorite aspect of Brass, and that I think good games that try and harken back to Brass take this aspect of it, and that's the symbiotic, or if you don't, some people will say symbiotic, some will say parasitic relationship between the players. I'm going to piggyback off of what you do and hopefully benefit more than you do.
Right.
And so, again, I mean, some say tomato, some say tomato. You get the idea. But that symbiotic partnership, but I want to make sure I'm getting the better end of the deal aspect, is what I think separates Brass and makes it so special.
Yes, and I will definitely, that also is very high on my list. When I think of interaction between players, I have these three broad categories in my mind. The first is destructive interaction, where you're trying to destroy the opponent's pieces. That's the classic war game thing, right? I want to destroy your armies, I want to destroy your cities. And that was all player interaction, in when I was early on in the hobby, right? Because I played war games. Then with Euro games, that was really de-emphasized, if not entirely eliminated, by the German Revolution in board games. And what we saw instead was resource contention. Auctions are all about resource contention. I want some resource, I'm going to auction you for it. We can be very blocky and aggressive on Age of Steam, but it's because we're battling for resources. I want that cube, I want this space, I want to be able to do this particular build of track and get there in front of you. So I think of that as resource contention. That's the primary form of interaction that we see in modern board games, because we've de-emphasized the destructive side, unless you're playing the style of games that goes for that. The third kind, and the hardest kind, is what you're talking about there, the symbiotic stuff, the thing where in order to advance my position, I'm going to have to advance other people's position as well. I want to make sure that over the aggregate, I get the best deal, because if I do a 50% gain with Edward and a 50% gain with Ken, hey, I'm ahead of both of you. And of course, we're all trying to do that. In a multiplayer, this doesn't work in a two-player game, of course, but in a multiplayer game, it gets very, very interesting. And Brass is one of the few games that really pulls that off to the max. I think, when there are Lacerda's games always have a little bit of it in there, not a huge amount, but a leavening of it. Concordia has it through the prefect mechanism. But it is, in general, a very hard thing to pull off, that symbiotic interaction. And that, I'll agree with you, is one of the things that's just really beautiful about Brass.
Again, symbiotic versus parasitic. It's you say it better than I do. It's like co-op and competition put together in the same word.
Co-opetition.
That I can never say that word. But yeah, no, I mean, there's a number, and I realize I'm getting a little ahead of myself and kind of taking a little bit of getting out of order here, but it's hard not to think of all the games, and not all the games, but a lot of the games out there that do that, right? Whether in the two that came to mind, it's funny, like we were going through and kind of adding in to our notes the different games what games harken back to that whole interaction and symbiotic nature of it. And the two that jumped out to me are both older games. They're 2013, 2014, older. They're 10 years old, so I think that's older. Wildcatters and Panamax. And those aren't two that like immediately think, oh, brass. But when we were talking about that, and not talking about, but bringing up the idea of that symbiotic nature, that's exactly that co-opetition is just magical. And I don't know that there was another game that did that before brass. And it maximizes the whole heads down and heads up aspect of the game. Heads down meaning I need to be able to do for me, while also being aware of what it is that you're doing over there. And so it threads the needle so perfectly that I understand why a lot of these games take that aspect, and I think they're better for it, usually.
Right. And I should mention the most common form of symbiotic interaction is shareholding, right? When you've got a stock and shares game, whether it's Big Boss, whether it's a Cube Rails game, whether it's 18XX, immediately you've got that symbiotic. I've got 5 shares in the company. Edward's got 2.
Enhancing that company helps you more than it helps me,
exactly.
So you should do it. Yeah.
But I sense that and maybe it's a bit my biases speaking, but my feeling is that the shareholding symbiotic feels crude in comparison to what brass does. Brass, to me, gets at... When I was playing war games a lot in the 70s and 80s, I was always frustrated that all the games were war games. I wanted games that were about other aspects of human interaction. And commercial competition was something I would love to see. And there were some games out there that tried to tackle that, but never really got there. To me, that symbiotic relationship stuff is really what makes commercial competition as a broad topic area really interesting in terms of games, because that symbiotic relationship is such an important part of it, and it leads to a very interesting way to have to think about your decisions.
Economic warfare, like in the boardroom. I totally agree with that. And it's why it's part of the reason we started this show, right? Because the economic battles that go on are so good. And that symbiosis can't help but be forefront on that, right?
So those to me, I would say, are the two big ones: the node-centered network building and the symbiotic interaction. I'll also throw in 2 other important, but I think secondary ones. One is logistics. You have to move resources across your network. So you've got to build up the network, and what you're doing with the network is moving resources so that you can get them to the right nodes in the right places. And that is... It feels very commonplace when I say, but there's not many games where you actually are moving resources over links in the network to assemble them in the right places. I mean, we have games that create resources and do resource conversion. I mean, that's bog standard Euro stuff. But how often do you have to worry about this resource is over here and I've got to move it over here? Let alone the fact that, that resource is one of Edward's resources, and if I use it, I'm helping him a little bit in the process. So I think that is an important part. And then the other one I would add is, the fourth one is very common, and that's money management. And of course, Age of Steam, 18XX, lots of games have this, I've got to build up a business. And of course, being a Martin Wallace, there's loans. So you've got to figure out, when do I take a loan? When do I not take a loan? How do I manage my money so that I've got enough money to do what I want to do, but at the same time I don't get crippled by interest payments?
On that note, now that you bring up the money management, brass does something that you don't see too often. I'm sure there are other games that didn't come to me, and that I'm hoping that either you or chat will be able to chime in on this. That it has an interesting notion of the amount of money I spend dictates turn order, and or the amount of money that we spend, I should say, collectively, like individually as players, dictates player order. And you don't see that a lot. And I'm trying to think thematically how that ties in. Like, why should spending more, spending less impact whether or not I should go earlier or later? And I think it's an understated aspect of brass that I don't see taken from a lot of these games, or you know, that they'll take a lot of the things that we've talked about, right? About especially the symbiotic parasitic nature of, you know, who I want to benefit more, but also the network building, you know, etc. But you don't see that aspect of it in a lot of places, and I wonder why that is, because I think that is a really clever aspect, because a lot of Euros, I have it, I'll spend it. Like, I don't have a good reason to sit on it. I don't have a good reason to spend it. Like, there's no incentive one way or the other, whereas brass, very much, you might want to wait to do it because of the amount of money that you're going to be spending this turn versus next turn. And I don't know. I think there's room for that, and I wish more games did that.
Yeah, well, turn order manipulation is generally something we really like.
Yeah, but
Splotters do a fantastic job of turn order manipulation in their games. You think of Power Grid, where people, the best way to irritate me is when you talk about Power Grid's turn order thing as a catch-up mechanism, and it absolutely isn't. It's all about where do I position myself in turn order so that I'm in the right place at the right time. And anything that does turn order manipulation, that adds an extra spice to a game.
And actually, Derek brings up a perfect example of what it is I'm talking about, Crystal Palace. So you have dice as workers. You can set the workers to any value you want, 1 to 6, right? So more powerful, bigger, more powerful, but you're spending money for when you do so. And then on top of that, the amount of money you spend dictates turn order as well. And I think that's a game that I never would have compared to brass, but it pulls that perfectly, that aspect that I'm talking about, that money management, but not just money management, but the money management of how much you spend this turn impacting turn order and how big of a deal that turn order manipulation can be. And I think that's one of the, now that I think about it, now that Derek brings it up, that's one of the key things that I love about Crystal Palace. And now I'm thinking back, oh yeah, right, okay. Kind of pulls from brass in that regard. Who'd have thunk it?
Yeah. But anyway, that's certainly how I think of but when I was thinking about this podcast, I was thinking those are the things I think that make a game brass-like. Give me a network with important nodes. Give me some symbiotic interactions, and then the logistics and the money management.
It's hard for me to not want to, maybe not say pick on, but to focus on Nucleum, because that's that was the impetus for this, and it was the most recent that we had played. And I'm like, yep, I see that, but I'm like, but it's just.
Well, I mean, I think this is a good time to think about Nucleum, because it is the recent game and the one that as very, very emphatically talks about its brass linkage. Now, with Nucleum, on first blush, it does have a lot of very similar qualities to that. You've got a bunch of cities. You can build industries in those cities. It even has a flipping mechanism to indicate when the city has been fully utilized in some way.
Right, and energized or whatever it might be, right.
You build rail track between the cities. So in no sense, again, you've got, I'm building a network, and it's focused on the nodes, which is kind of like what we were talking about. So there's a lot of similarities there. Interestingly, though, all of those similar bits work differently. When I was at Lobster Trap, one of the things I did is I was walking past the table and there were 3 people huddled over the rules to Nucleum. So since I played it 3 times recently, I sat down and went through it each. And they'd all played brass, so they had some familiarity. I kept saying, yeah, well, it's kind of like in brass, only totally different. Yeah, you build track to jump around the board, unlike in brass where you can only build track off your network. And when you build in a city, it has to be in your network. There's nothing like the location cards in Brass that allow you to jump over the network. So it was a kind of almost everything was, yeah, you've got uranium, but only you can use it. Nobody else can use it. You can't, but it's got to travel over the rail links the same way that coal has to travel, but you can't take anybody else's uranium.
Oh, and I just don't know how to do this without feel like I'm bagging on Nucleum. The action selection mechanism in Nucleum is fantastic.
It is.
Absolutely fantastic, and I love it.
And that brings in, of course, another game, Concordia, because it takes the Concordia ideal of I've got a set amount of actions, I've got to play them, and then I've got to almost waste an action to pull them back, but then adds some beautiful twists to the Concordia mechanism.
Yeah, it works really, really well. But where it feels like it falls short for me is the fact that for all those reasons that you just mentioned, yeah, it's just like Brass, but completely different. It's lesser and worse in every regard than Brass, in every single thing that it took from it. It makes it less engaging, it makes it less interesting, and it's less challenging. And that makes it a lesser for it. So it took this really great action selection mechanism and took all these really cool things from Brass and then watered down everything that made them really cool in Brass, and now it doesn't feel anything like it except surface level. And it just I don't know why it bothers me so much, but it does, because all the tightness and all the, for instance, in Nucleum, and I'm trying hard not to bag on it, but it's hard. In Nucleum, you can build track wherever you want. The end. If there's open space to build, so that tightness that Brass has about being, you can only build track basically off your existing network, off those nodes, if you will.
Right.
That limitation that I feel like is integral and important, it removes. And now it's But that's an example of it for me. I understand wanting to change it and make it your own game, but it just feels like it took all these really great things that made this game great and then made them lesser, and it doesn't improve your game. And so,
yeah, that's an interesting example. I think whenever you've got a network building game, it seems to be certainly a common thing that you need some way you want to have a certain degree of blocking going on to constrict so that players get in each other's way, but you need a way to jump over the blocks.
right.
So in Age of Steam, you can build out of any city. There is no limitation, except for on one or two maps. It's pretty much always you can build out of any city. You don't have to make it contiguous.
It behooves you to do so, right, yeah.
But should somebody block somebody else, Alyssa and Shrey in Finland, then you've got a way to jump over and at least do something, right? You may be crippled, but you're not dead. In Brass, that mechanism is the location cards. It's random which location cards you've got. You've got to kind of make lemonade out of the lemons you're given in your hand, but you have the chance to jump. And if things are really, really bad, you can use the wild card option, the two cards down in Lancashire, the scout action in Birmingham. And that gives you a way to break over. But it's hard. It's hard to jump over. You're paying a price. That price isn't so clear in Nucleum. There is a bit of a price, because if you don't fully connect your network, you lose an opportunity for scoring. But that price isn't so clear. And it also comes back to my big beef with Nucleum. And it really comes down to another element of Brass, which I didn't put on my list, but because it's not, I don't think people do follow it, and it's a thing people miss. But it's something I've already mentioned. In Brass, there is one way to score points. You put stuff on the map. Okay, you can put industries on the map, and you can put rail links on the map. You're both things you put on the map. It's all about get your stuff onto the map and build that infrastructure. That's what the game's about. And in the end, we add up points, you add up points for your track, and for your industries, there's nothing else. Nucleum, there's a gazillion, quantizillion ways of scoring points. And that, to me, immediately makes the whole thing diffuse. And this is a common characteristic of the modern, heavier board games. You have a very clever action selection mechanism that you kind of drool over. I mean, all these tea games. I loved in Teotihuacan the way you have to kind of organize your dice to get them all to move together and on the same spot. Lovely mechanism. Tecano has its kind of rotating. There's all these lovely action selection mechanisms, and then you score for everything. And you've got a gazillion paths you seem to be able to go down to score points. And to me, then the focus of the game loses. Brass, you've got one way to score points. Age of Steam, you move cubes. There's no other way you get to score points. And I like that focus because you can still have multiple paths of victory. There's still many ways you can get to that target point, but I feel it makes so much difference when you have a very clear focused target.
Why? That's what I want. I want to try and come up with an answer on this because I don't know the answer off the top of my head. Why is it that the majority that are these type of Euros, why do they feel the need to diffuse the scoring? Why do they have to become point salads? Is it because people like scoring points and it makes it easy, right? And so even if you're not doing well, you're at least doing something positive? Is it the fact that it's hard? Brass is hard, right? Like from a strategy standpoint, maybe not rules overhead, which it's funny because when we were going through these various games of recent and talking about this, how relatively streamlined Brass can be, right? It's old school in that regard. But again, the scoring is one thing. So why do these modern board games, what is it? Is it trying to get broad appeal? And because of a game like Brass, yet it's been such a highly ranked, well thought of, well selling game. And yet you're only getting points from that thing. And they're not point salady. So what is it about the majority of these type of Euro conversion aspect, even route building games, that feel like you need to get points from a million different places? I don't know, because it makes I say this, I really enjoy Marrakesh, which,
right.
I'm bagging on point salad. For some reason, it just hits for me. I think the action selection mechanism is the hook in that game. The way the drafting of the cubes happen, just like the action selection mechanism in Nucleum is so damn good. But then it diffuses it with all this other, honestly, mediocre crap that just puts lipstick on stuff that everybody knows.
Right.
Everybody has done this ad nauseum. Why can't we pare it down? Why are designers, developers, publishers not doing that more? I don't know the answer, but it feels like it's just... Does it take more development time to really pare it down? I don't know.
My guess is that it is that it's harder. There's a famous phrase, and I can never remember the guy's name, French guy, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, who said something like, I'll have to look this up, your design isn't complete. The test of a design being complete isn't when there's nothing more to add. It's when there's nothing more to take away. And I really do feel a lot of board games I would be happy with if they followed that kind of advice. And maybe I long ago realised that my tastes were totally different to most people, so it could well be that I'm a weirdo.
That's not true.
But then the Brass example says, well, maybe I'm not so weird because it's focused. And then I think of some other point salads. The classic example of a point salad game designer is Feld, right?
Sure, of
His
course.
most famous game, Castles of Burgundy. Often called a point salad. How do you score almost all your points in Castles of Burgundy?
Put stuff on the board.
You fill the zones in.
Yeah, well, you're right. Yeah,
right? You get some points for the animals, you get some points for your towers, you get some points for the little monasteries, but the heart of the game is fill the zones. Fairly simple, straightforward what you're aiming at. Look at Vitor Lacerda's Lisboa. Again, this feels, first blush, point salady. How do you score your points? You get them by having your shops in the right location on the grid, and by doing the decrees. It's really that's where most of your points are coming from, those two mechanisms. Now, there's a bunch of little ones thrown here left and right, and those annoy me. It's just like in Brass Birmingham. Probably the thing that annoys me most is the market bonus that gives you victory points. Why is it that every market bonus in Brass gives you something different? Why don't they just give you the same thing? How is it made interesting, or the game made more interesting by giving you a different thing at each place? I don't see where that's adding to the game, right? I'm not making a decision of I'm going to go there for the development as opposed to there for the extra money. Because usually my focus is on where can I make the connection in order to sell stuff. That's way more important. So it feels like a little bit of extra variety where it wasn't needed. But in most games that I'm sort of like to rag on as Ter Tucano Regni, it's that explosion of point scoring options seems to be the element of the game.
So chat is saying more ways to score points opens it up to more strategies. Does it? Does it? Or does it give the appearance of that?
That is my feeling. I mean, it's
so are designers and developers and publishers calling people stupid? No, I'm serious. They're not gonna. They're not. You have more strategies, but you really don't. And I wonder that people aren't gonna notice. They're happy, and it
may be that it's easier to get more strategies. It was interesting. Part of the prep for this. I went back and read a lot of old forum posts on Brass, right from when it first came out.
Yep, like 2007, original Brass.
Really old BGG posts on that, and several of them talked about there's so many different paths you can take to score to get to victory here in this game. Do I go hard on cotton? Do I go hard on rails? What's the role of coal and iron in all of this? There was a lot of discussion there about that, and that was really particularly since I have this thing about diffusion of direction. It struck me as interesting that you want a spread, the multiple paths of being able to do things, but you want them to converge on a clear goal.
Almost like making a diamond shape, right? Yeah.
And I suspect it's just very hard to find how to get them to converge. And the thing is, where we are in the board game design is people are enjoying coming up with clever action selection mechanisms. They
and there are some really good ones out there.
Beautiful ones.
Yeah.
I mean, so many times I'm impressed by, this is a really neat action selection mechanism. But getting that spread and then converge to the points payoff is the hard part. And let's face it, again, Brass does not have an action selection mechanism. You can choose any action you like.
Fair. So now Shrey says there are a lot of people who enjoy much of what you're talking about, though. So there are designers and companies addressing that market. That's fair. Valid. Look, play what you dig. I hear you. But Jake kind of brings up the crux of what it is, the point I'm trying to make, which is if every strategy is viable, then what's the difference between good play and bad play? If the difference in doing well and doing poorly isn't that big of a spread, then the meaningful decisions aren't there as much. And I don't feel the impact of those decisions, which then removes the main reason I play board games, which is a competition of decision making. And I think that right there, that sums up where I take umbrage with this. That just clearly it's not, the games aren't made for me, and that's okay. But yeah, I want there to be a clear delineation between good play and bad play. You played well, score well. You played poorly, you score like crap. I'm good with that, but not every. I guess it's maybe just different tastes. Maybe that's what it comes down to. I guess, and maybe I'm getting frustrated over. Maybe it's just, and I'm realizing this now as I sit here. It's more or less just not my cup of tea.
Yeah, and the thing is, what we're trying to do in this conversation is articulate what it is that sets our taste out, right? To try and say. And I find this a very interesting aspect of board games because, I think of it in many ways, it's like music, right? Everybody has different tastes in music. We all have different things. But if you can figure out what it is you like, that makes it easier to find more of what you like. And I want to have that with board games. I want to figure out what I like so that when somebody comes up to me and plays
it's like this.
Or
Right.
even when I'm having my first play of a game, can I tell whether this is a game that's worth me investing more of my time in or not? Because I always worry that, I'm going to play a game, say maybe Nucleum is really the perfect game for me, but I'd only discover it after 12 plays. That's the kind of situation I want to avoid. If I can be a bit more deliberate and articulate about what I like and don't like about games, that way I can better avoid that problem and more easily spot, by looking at the rules or by looking at a playthrough, that's going to fit for me. Similarly, can it help me with other people? As I get to learn, can it help me build a picture of other people's tastes so that I can go for things that way as well? And to me, one of the things that thinking through this, it's really brought home, I would say only in the last few months, has it really brought home to me the importance of a limited range of scoring. That I've realized is a common feature of games I like. And so that's something I'm going to be looking for more and more. How many ways are there to score points? Now, moving slightly off Nucleum, since we've been ragging on it so much, that is something that I remember being something that was appealing about Imperial Steam. With that game, there was a clear focus, and it was very interestingly set up because we're all trying to build to Trieste. And that was, I thought, a really nice mechanism. We were all aiming for Trieste, right? Now,
Again, it's that whole multiple strategies, all
Yeah.
directed towards that one goal. So,
Right.
no, all that fits. That makes sense, right?
the thing that walloped me for Imperial Steam, and again, we're comparing what we like and also bringing out the brass comparison. Again, you've got node-heavy network that you're building. The nodes are in many ways are important or more because the industries, the factories that you build in the nodes very much required in order to get moving. There's a sort of logistics there because you've got to get the necessary materials to build the track, which actually I thought was really nice. You had to have the factories to build the materials to build the track that you were going through. It was quite a nice touch. The problem for me with Imperial Steam is it was just too easy to get stuck.
Hi.
Yeah, but it happened to both of us on different plays, right?
Yeah.
You just sit somewhere and you can't actually make forward progress. And now you've got this wonderful action selection mechanism where it doesn't matter what actions you pick because you're not going anywhere this round because you haven't got some key resource that you need to be able to make forward progress. And that stuckness really got to me.
And actually, Shrey's bringing up exactly what it is you're pointing out. Imperial Steam should hit for so much for you and I, because it does all of these things that we're talking about and saying that we like.
Right.
It should be a hit. However, I feel like it's almost too punitive in a way because of what you just said. The fact that if you get stuck, the end. There's just no way around it. And Shrey says then there's a skill gap aspect, right? Because you think of a game like Food Chain Magnate. You fall behind, you're SOL. You're just done.
Right.
So and looking back on this, look, I appreciate the game and I think it does really, really well, but it's also not one of my favorites. And I just realized because you're just out. You're just stuck.
And it's not so much that you're out, as in you're not competitive for the win. It's that you can't really do anything. So the essence of board gaming is making interesting decisions, right?
Yes.
But if you're in a situation where, hey, I've got no decision to make because I literally cannot do anything, which was what happened to us, in our different games of Imperial Steam. Well, I've played Food Chain Magnate 3 times. Each time, the final hour has been excruciating, and I've just wanted it to end as soon as possible because I was stuck. I just couldn't really do anything. And that stuckness, I think, is a problematic element. You need that leap over ability.
Agreed.
And that is a criticism that's been made, particularly Brass Lancashire, that you can get stuck into a hole. I've not had it happen to me, so...
Derek's brought it up, and there's absolutely an experiential gap,
Right.
which, again, a lot of these games that we're talking about pointality or aspects or whatnot, avoid that experiential gap in a lot of ways, or at least mask over them.
Right.
So can't we all just agree that Raw is the perfect game. No, because I apparently, but I suck at it. I've yet to ever win that game. So there's that. Yeah, it's really, and that's the crux, is finding that mesh. Where is your perfect balance between those two things? Of, okay, we're talking about Imperial Steam, maybe take, and Food Chain Magnet, maybe take it too far for our liking to the one end, and then your amalgamation name of a game, Takanu, whatever.
Takanu Regni.
That is too far the other way. So trying to find the Goldilocks. And again, what you said earlier, I think really at the end is all about personal taste and figuring out your way, or figuring out what works best for you and really honing in on that.
And also a factor in here is the rules complexity. I as I said, I felt with Nucleum, things needed to be taken out. And I don't know what those things are, and I'm not a designer, I'm not a developer, so, what do I know? But I really did feel that the things needed to be removed. And sometimes things need to be, I feel, more polished. That was the problem I had with Autobahn, where I just felt there were just too many little finicky things that just didn't quite seem to flow right. And it was hard, again, to put my finger on why. I wonder, actually, whether it had something to do with the fact that the nodes didn't really make much difference. And had there been something that would have kind of given a bit more weight to the nodes in Autobahn, that might have been somewhere that would take you with that. I don't know. It's been a while since I played it, and my memory is hazy about the game now. But those were the kinds of things that went through when I thinking about back at Autobahn now.
Scott says, the whole problem, if there aren't multiple strategies to victory, is there even a game? It's a puzzle with one right answer. Strategy B might be 10% less viable than A, and it's the player's responsibility, to make up the difference. In the end, the players still end up as a form of the RNG, don't they? Because we're human and we don't always make optimal moves. And that's what frustrates the ever-living crap out of Martin the Younger. Like, he expects us to always make the right move, and we don't. And so that in and of itself is a bit of randomness thrown in that I think helps that aspect, I guess, of the bringing in. I'm having a struggle trying to frame this right, but the players themselves, we're not computers, and so making lemons or lemonade out of lemons based on what the other players do in optimal moves is part of the reason we play these games as well, and what the right actions aren't always clear, and having that obscured a little bit, either through a series of layers of, okay, this is going to happen, then that, and not being able to calculate that out. I think games benefit from that as well. I'm getting a little muddled in my head, being able to
with the multiple strategy thing. I think there is something certainly to be said about some games that can do that kind of well, but it also, a lot of good games have pretty much one strategy. Age of Steam. You've got to figure out how to get your network so you can make those 5 and 6 cube movements. That's basically the strategy to Age of Steam. Build, do a couple of 2 cube movements, do some 3 and 4s, get up to 5 and 6 as quickly as possible. Game, that's it. Very easily stated, right? But so hard to pull off. And so often the strategy can be relatively easy to say, but very hard to execute. And the battle is, how easily can you execute that strategy?
And that's kind of what I'm saying, I guess, is, again, it's, I guess the core goal is pretty clear, but we as gamers can't always see it, and being able to execute it just because it doesn't mean it always works out the way. And that's one of the, I would say, benefits of a game like Brass, that, okay, you can't always do everything perfect the way you want, right? It's not a perfect information game. You have the randomness of the cards in it and making lemonade out of lemons. Whereas I guess a game, again, I don't want to keep going back to Nucleum, but it's the most recent one we played. There's not a lot of that in there to vary it up for me. The variance comes from the action select, or the order in which the various tiles, but in the end, it's still a basic set of actions, and how well do you do that? And so
But also the greatest variety always with a highly interactive game is what everybody else is doing.
Right.
Right. It's why people will look at some older school games and say, how do you get the variable player powers or random setup? Well, actually, you don't need that much variable player powers or random setup when you've got human beings doing different things randomly. And that's kind of interesting because that you need more paths and more puzzly elements if you've got a multiplayer solitaire style game. Because otherwise the puzzle's the same every time.
Right.
But as the more you crank up the interaction across the various styles of interaction, then the more the interaction becomes the variability, and you are playing against the players as opposed to playing to master the mechanics of the game. And I want the mechanic. I mean, with games that I enjoy most, I want the rules and the mechanics to disappear.
Get out of the way.
And me to focus purely on what are other people doing? How can I get into what I need to do? How do I manage to pull off what I need to do? And the mechanics become uninteresting. And the problem to me with games, with a lot of the kitchen sink style games, is that there's so many mechanics, it feels like there's too much. Now, of course, that may be because we blitz through so many games so quickly. And maybe, again, if I played Teotihuacan 20 times, I would feel differently about it. That's quite possible. But I definitely get the sense that there is a lot more of the game is puzzling out the different routes and the mechanics as opposed to, well, let's focus on the competition between human beings.
Which is where games like Age of Steam and such shine. This is a very long way for us to say, figure out what tickles your fancy and play what you dig. How's that?
Exactly. But also, we've talked about some newish games. I wanted also to talk about some older games that have some brassish qualities.
Yeah. I mean, I very briefly mentioned a couple,
right?
but yeah.
Before I go there, I
Yeah.
wanted to briefly mention there's a game that hasn't come out yet that we may find out more about, that is very intriguing. That's on the future list, which is Steam Power.
Yes.
So this is
wait, I forget who designed.
It's
Oh,
a Martin
right.
Wallace
Yeah.
future game.
I know.
There's been talk about it. I know nothing about it. I'm very intrigued because if one thing we do know, he does have a track record of this kind of game. He can pull it off. He may not pull it off, of course, like most designers. I mean, Knizia's got more brilliant games than anybody else because he's got way more games that got nowhere than anybody else.
I mean, outside of Splatter, like they're the only ones that I feel like just succeed. And I guess Cole, really. Those are the only two that I can come up with that just hit.
Right. Oh, for you. Yeah, I mean, I'm not as necessarily as taken with either of those two as you two, I guess.
Well, I mean, you have the right to be wrong. That's okay.
Exactly. Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed,
So
I do.
yeah, I'm looking forward to. Obviously, we're gonna be featuring that on the show at a future point. But
Yeah, I
I'm
thought we should get a plug in that future point. Keep an eye on Heavy Cardboard for Steam Power. I'm
You're
very
hired.
intrigued
You're
to
hired.
see where
Well, I
it's
mean,
go.
you can't exactly. I mean, this is a podcast, so asking for thumbs doesn't work here. So yeah, I appreciate that.
But might as well keep going. Anyway, I wanted to talk about some other games that you mentioned a couple, Wildcatters and Panamax.
Yeah, because I mean, Wildcatters, you're building, which still to this day is definitely a top 20, if not a top 10 game for me. I think, and the second edition actually did improve upon it a little bit, but I digress. It has symbiotic infrastructure building, and whenever it's all about oil drilling. So whenever somebody actually pays to drill for oil, they get a benefit, but you get to piggyback off of it, provided you've put yourself in a position to do so. So it definitely has that parasitic, symbiotic aspect of it on top of an area majority game that I think just works so well. And then Panamax, all about moving cargo on various players' ships, and that shared incentive of getting things delivered across through the Panama Canal, I think works really, really well. So yeah, those are two older games, at least that hit for me, that I think are kind of forgotten about at this point, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they're 9 and 10 years old respectively, and I think they're both like legitimately great games.
And we've mentioned Splatter, and the game that strikes me that has, in many ways, a great similarity to Brass in a very unobvious way is The Great Zimbabwe.
Yeah, I want to hear this because I've been racking my brain trying to see it, and help me out.
Okay, well, again, the symbiotic part is immediately obvious, right? In order to get your temples up, you're going to have to get these ritual goods. You can't build all these ritual goods yourself. You're going to have to go to other people to get the ritual goods. So immediately the symbiotic part comes in. The other bit that's perhaps less obvious is the network building side, because of course you're not laying any track or anything like that in the Great Zimbabwe, but there's a lot of logistics. A lot of time you're puzzling out, how do I get these 3 ritual goods into the same place? Have I got enough cows to do the hops through the various temples that I've got to look at? How do I actually arrange all these things to happen? And then, of course, the intense competition, because if I don't do this before you're going to make sure all the raw materials are swallowed up. I'm not going to be able to do this. So there's actually quite a lot of logistics, a very indirect network building, and a lot of symbiotic stuff going on in the Great Zimbabwe. And I think that's one of the things that makes that game such a fascinating game.
Yeah, that's definitely a quintessential parasitic, I would say, instead of symbiotic. Not to get too lost in the words, but no, you make a really fair point. I guess because I don't think of it as a route building or network building, but it totally is. It 100% is. And like you said, you're required to use other people's, a lot of times, other people's resources, artisans and craftsmen, whatnot. Yeah, good point. I like that. Yeah, good call on that. It's one I wouldn't have thought of, but no, you nailed it. Agreed. What's the other one?
And the other one is very obvious, although most people probably haven't heard of it these days, which is Age of Industry, which was the game that Martin Wallace designed after Brass to streamline Brass, and also to try and turn the system into a true system and family of games. We've played it a couple of times. It was, in my view, not as good as Brass. I would prefer Brass, but on the other hand, I think I preferred it to a lot of other games that we've played in recent times, because it does have a nice mix of route building and symbiotic behavior and all the things that I like about Brass, streamed down perhaps a bit more than I would like, but maybe because it's unfamiliar with Brass, I don't know. But the actual resulting game is actually pretty reasonable.
I thought it was fine. I might have to play it again to really be able to.
We should do a stream of it, I think.
Okay, let's do it. I'm down for this.
Yeah.
I mean, I would argue all 4 of those games that we just brought up, I think would be interesting to piggyback off of this. So, Age of Industry, Great Zimbabwe, Wildcatters, and Panamax. I'm in for that.
Yeah, and those are 4 very nice games. I have 3 of them. Panamax is the one I don't have, but
I got you.
The reason I'm saying I have them, that means I like them.
Right.
I mean, I've only got 60 games, right? I don't have a big collection, and anything I don't like gets chucked out, because my rule is, if the game's on the shelf and it's a game day and somebody picks a game off the shelf and I feel a bit disappointed that they picked that game as opposed to one of the other ones, it's out. It's gone.
Ruthless.
To me.
You are ruthless.
That is my test. I think it's a fine test.
Oh, I'm not arguing that. That's just wow. I got a lot of games to go. Oh, that's rough.
Well, you've got a library for a different purpose. I mean, you're looking for a comprehensive library, and I'm looking for.
I don't know that I am anymore, but I digress. So okay, this leads to the last question then is, do we want more Brass-ish games?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about this sort of a week or 2 ago, and thinking about, I do feel there's the core, the skeleton, the bones of Brass are really, really good. And therefore, I think there is a room and a strong place for more development to vary that. And the model that leaps to my mind isn't the Age of Steam model that Martin Wallace was looking at going with Age of Industry. Because the idea of the Age of Steam model, of course, is all you got to do is produce a new map. You need no more components other than a map. And so he designed the rules of Age of Industry to facilitate that. But I think that's missing out on what can make a brass family of games really work. For me, you've got you really want to be able to, you want to raise the bar and make it more like the way 18xx varies, by saying you want completely different games that change the industries up, and move around and come up with imaginative. Maybe you find different ways of doing the two-phase thing, or maybe you get rid of a two-phase at all. Have industries that behave in different kind of ways. What kind of other resources might you want to move across the network? How does the interaction of the network and the resources work in order to make the logistics puzzle more interesting? It strikes me there's a pretty wide range of possible designs here. And one of the interesting things about it is, and the appeal of this is, when you've got a game that is a heavier game, which Brass is, if you get variations on a theme like you do with the 18xx, it makes learning new games so much easier, because once you've understood the base 18xx, you only have to know what the difference is. And that could be particularly appealing in the Brass direction.
And it's funny, I'm sitting here thinking, yeah, this sounds like a great idea. And then on the same side or the flip side of the same coin, I'm like, and here we are probably going to sit here saying, oh, it's just the Brass knockoff. So why, like...
do we say that about 18xx? Do we say that about 1822?
No, we don't. No, that's the interesting thing. But no, I'm kind of laughing at us for that, saying like, oh, now we're just gonna poo-poo it because it's just more of the same, but it's a different riff on it. And I'm like, we're never gonna be happy. Like I'm kind of critiquing myself in that regard. But I like where your head's at. I would be down for that. But I don't. But I wonder. I think there's a market for that. I mean...
And there has been some movement. Again, if you go back into the early 2010s, there were maps developed. There was a France map. There was a Yorkshire map. The France map apparently was available on Order of the Hammer, which was the Brass online gaming site, for quite a while. In fact, I found this post from a certain Gavin King saying that the France map was actually really pretty good. He seemed to like it. So that has been thought about. There, they didn't change up the industries at all. They said they basically changed the towns, different layouts, but basically the same industries. Purely coincidentally, a couple of days ago, somebody announced on BGG a Brass Amsterdam variant. Now, this was really interesting because for a start, they went backwards 200 years in time. You don't have railways or even canals. You have I think sort of rough roads and then brick-laid roads for the second phase. You have wheat being grown. You have iron, and I think bricks may be the other resource. So completely rethinking the resource relationships. And I don't know anything about this game other than the guy's description. There's no rules. There's only a brief look at a rather beautifully produced home-done production. But that's the kind of thinking that's interesting to me. Right, which is, how do you take the core bones of this game, push them into a different way, change the rules in some interesting ways, and thinking of 18xx's model. Now, the question, of course, is how does this fit in with the intellectual property stuff? How could people use the word Brass? What would Roxley and or Martin Wallace think of somebody doing Brass variants? Could you imagine a world like 18xx where there's loads of different companies producing their own 18 various variations on Brass? I think it would be fascinating, but whether it would ever happen, who knows?
I'm in. If we can get the files, let's give it a try. That'd be cool. But yeah, I mean, let's face it. Like 18xx has a cult following. Age of Steam very much does. I'm down for some more Brass. In that regard.
And we should mention as well, David Turksey did that with an Isle of Wight fan-made variant on Brass, a 2-player Brass.
I mean, and to be clear, I know David is a huge fan of the games that he was inspired by. And again, this is me kind of softening the blow. I think the action selection, both the way the tiles are acquired as well as the really hard decision on whether or not to actually play him to your board or lay him down as rail, I think is really good. Really good. I love the decision aspect of that. But anyway, I digress. So,
Yeah.
where do we fall on this? More brass, please.
Well, I mean, I'd something
think so.
I'd like to
I
see it
think so.
developed. I would like to, as I said, to go the 18xx route and see what comes out. Because, I mean, we play a lot of games. Only occasionally do games really, really resonate. I mean, Nucleum is a fine game. I'd be quite happy playing it if we're at an evening in a cabin and that was the only game on the shelf.
I would be willing to give it a try, 2 or 3 players.
Yeah.
I'm not willing to do it 4 players again, but I agree.
But the thing is, there's so many of them out there. But sometimes a game really kind of grabs people's attention. Brass grabbed mine, just like Age of Steam grabbed mine. Grabbed yours to some extent as well. It's a top 20 game, I know, for you.
Oh, yeah, and obviously Age of Steam is...
Yep. So when you've got a game that resonates, and it's clearly not quite just me, because, number 1 and number 20, then maybe that means there's more room for designers to say, okay, how can I riff off the pattern a bit more? There's part of me that wonders, what would Nucleum be like if it had been deliberately done as a variant of Brass, with similar theme, but, with that kind of trying to tweak it as opposed to be the opposite of it.
Focusing a little bit more. And I think that's at its core where it misses, right? Is it just doesn't have that focus. And I think but dialing in that level of focus from it being too narrow to too broad, that's what makes really good designers, developers, and publishers, right?
Yep.
And no game is made for everybody, outside of maybe the climbers. And it just goes to show, figure out what it is that makes the games click for you. Focus on those games, but also don't be afraid to branch out. Like don't get so tunnel vision within, I only like this. I mean, you do you, but anyway.
Yeah, so that's us trying to articulate what we like and don't like about games. And everybody's got a different articulation, everyone's got different tastes, but I think it's always interesting to try and understand one's tastes and likes and why you have those likes.
And clearly we need to get Trey in here so he can be the give a different point of view, because you and I are very similar in that regard. We're not a total match on everything, no. but there is a fair bit of overlap. But that to be and same with Shrey, but he also goes in different directions as well. So
we all have these overlaps and separations and the like, and that's what makes a game group interesting. And it's nice when you can come up to me and say, I know you don't think you're going to deal with the devil because it's got a hidden role thing, but you'll like this, and you were right.
Right. Yeah. But that's a good example of maybe outside your comfort zone and from where you would expect, but allowing yourself to be surprised.
Yeah.
And man, when a game can surprise you like that, that's so good, and that's so invigorating. It gets you excited about gaming again, right? Because let's face it, all of us that have been in the industry or in the hobby for many years, we get to be it stagnates a little at times. So having something come that's fresh and new and exciting, yay for designers, developers, and publishers that try and do something new. And you know what? Just because something misses for you doesn't mean it was a failure. It just wasn't a hit for you. And I appreciate what it is. I like all these new games coming out, and it gives us a chance to see new riffs on old mechanisms or new interpretations of things.
Yeah.
And
I mean, what I'm saying with the Brass 18xx comparison is also that you can get a lot of innovation and a lot of originality with small changes to an existing core. And I mean, the example that leaps to my mind, Age of Steam, Sweden recycling map. I mean, that completely bends your brain. And yet it's just a small change to a system that was very familiar. And often you can get a lot of innovation with small changes.
And then I show Martin's station full, and you don't trust me anymore. See, not everything's a hit. All right, that's
Exactly.
it. That's a wrap. You got anything else for
Nope.
this episode?
I'm just hoping for more episodes soon.
Well, okay. I was told earlier that I need to wring every single ounce of willingness for you being on the podcast. So I guess why don't we do this again in 2 weeks? We'll figure out what we're going to talk about.
Okay.
All right, done.
Okay.
All right, you heard it here first. Thanks everybody for watching live as well as downloading the podcast. Hopefully, yeah. I guess that's it. I'm Edward.
I'm Martin.
Y'all have a good night. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
All right, now that y'all are still here, don't leave yet. All right, so that's it. I can't stop. I guess I can stop that recording. Hold on. Oh yeah, look at that. That was good. That was fun.
I think so.
Good job.
Interesting discussion.
You're so much better at this than I am. You really are. But
Well,
you
if
know
want
what?
Somebody to host things and do things, I'm quite happy to do them.
I'm all for it. That works. All right. So now that that's done, so the podcast is done. If you are currently watching on YouTube, thanks for watching. Appreciate it. Like, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Consider supporting the show. It's not down there, but it normally is.
Thumbs!
That actually, it's directly below me. I just saw patreon.com/HCHQ. If you're over on Twitch, hi, thanks. We're going to play some marbles real quick because that's what we do at the end of streams now. So if you're on YouTube, I'm sorry, but it doesn't work. You got to go over to Twitch. The link is somewhere there. Twitch.tv/heavycardboard. A moment.
I have no idea what he's talking about with his marbles because I don't do Twitch yet.
I have been told that like the video quality is just better on Twitch, like for the viewers. So interesting. We love you, Shrey. All right. Anyway, if you go over to Twitch now, give me a minute. I will take care of all of that after we're done with the show. Time to bring up marbles. Okay. It's literally racing marbles down a track. There is no agency whatsoever, but it's just silly fun. So anyway, head over to twitch.tv/heavycardboard. And there we go. So hold on. You know what? I want to bring this up so that we can get Martin's view on this. All right. So here we go. Shrey says, the video quality does seem better over on Twitch. So there you go. Okay. So apparently you can only follow right now over on Twitch. So appreciate it. Those that do. We're just going to do one race tonight. That's it. Because I don't want Martin to have to endure 3 races of this, which I think he's going to think are pretty dumb. But fun. So here we go. If we look, our local there, this is our leaderboard. You'll see that yours truly, out of our 3 races that we've done, I've won one and I'm somehow in the lead of the leaderboard. That's not really a good look for the streamer. So apologies on that, but it is what it is. Anyway, so here are the various racetracks. I'm just going to do a random for tonight. Okay, so let's see. We're going to choose a random one. Let's see. 34 seconds, but this one, 2.5 minutes. That feels good. That'll work. Okay. So we are going to do that. Hold on. I'm going to shrink that down. All right. So assuming y'all are over on Twitch now, twitch.tv/heavycardboard. If you type in, and it says right here at the top, you have to type in the word or the exclamation point play. If you do so there you go. See, Jake's got it. There you go. Y'all got it figured out. All you new people over here in chat. So seriously, follow as well. It helps because we're trying to get to where you can actually subscribe and all that fun stuff here on Twitch. But anyway, so I'm going to give it about 3 minutes before we actually get started to give everybody an opportunity. So 180 seconds. There you go. You have 3 minutes. Exclamation point play. And you see everyone that is entered. When you If you just participate, you get 100 points. If you win, you get 1,000. What do you do with the points? Nothing yet. But maybe I'll do a giveaway at some point. We'll do a Grand Prix, something. We'll do giveaways. I don't know. But I haven't gotten there yet. But anyway. So, again, I feel like I have watched way too much Twitch over the last week. There are some... It's exhausting watching some of these folks that do this. Like, the energy level is just way high. It's way high. God bless them. Just not my thing. Anyway, twitch.tv/heavy cardboard. If you're over on YouTube, you got to come over to Twitch. If you're on Twitch, !play. Eventually, you see right now, we only have one marble. I will get us skins to where you can choose different marbles to have fancy marbles. I don't understand the whole emoting for different marble skins either. I haven't gotten there yet. I apologize. I don't understand that. So, there we go. Oh, and while I got y'all, tomorrow, it sounds like we are 3 players for an 18OE during the day, and then we have 18 Chesapeake public. The 18OE is going to be for patrons only. The 18 Chesapeake is going to be for everybody. So be sure to tune in for that. Looking forward to that.
Which is 18OE?
That is the giant, huge one, but we're just playing a small scenario.
Oh, okay.
So it's going to be a relearning game for me and a learning game for Greg, whereas James has played it. He was the impetus for that, so we're just doing that.
Yeah, I would definitely like to try a bit more on the 18XX, even though I struggle with it. I do, again, it's economics, network building.
A whole lot that you should like. I mean, yeah.
It's mental arithmetic. That's always
yeah. And it's all simple, but man, there's a lot of it, ain't there?
Add up 5 numbers, and I'm jelly. I'd much rather solve differential equations.
God bless you. 1817. I've never played it. I have it. I would like to play it. 18 USA. Isn't that 1817? Like, but on a different map, I think. Anyway, 20 seconds, ! Play. Trying to get us to 20, because you're guaranteed, as long as you finish the race, to get points in the top 20. So, here we go. You all ready? I am going to do my very best. Here, you can watch it down there. Here we go. I need... So we are off to the races. Scott, out to a quick lead. Now I can't do play-by-play here because I'm terrible at it. I'm more of a better color analyst. What do we got? Dr. Viz and Shrey. Shrey battling for the lead. And there's the whole map.
Let's see.
Forest of Oh my, Dr. Viz, I am so sorry. You are not going to make it, bud. DED dead. Rome Demand Stone taking the lead. Cathodin in second. Hey, Derek, by the way, the resident expert, I guarantee, in this is Derek. Oh, somebody's going to get yeeted. Watch this. Somebody's going to hit one of these hands and just get punted into space. Wow, nobody. 15 left. By the way, wow. Again, oh, somebody just got yeeted. They just got punted into space. How am I in first, but I'm not? I don't understand this. Wait, oh, there's different directions you could have gone. Alyssa in the lead. Can she hold on? That is a big lead over E. Jowser in third. Can she hold on? Oh, that looks pretty... Oh, I think she's got this locked up. Unless there's something we don't see. Oh, narrowly avoided that. All right, I think Alyssa has got the W. Unlike her Eagles this week. Yeah, she's got it. Locked up. Congratulations, Alyssa. E looks like in second. I was in first. I'm no longer in the leaderboard. Jowser trying to make a case or make a run at it. No dice. E gets it. Let's go back to 10th. Let's see. Oh, there's a battle for 10th. Oh. Apparently, if you fall behind, you get 8 up. Is Climb to Waterfall gonna survive? They did not. They died. So out of this, only 8 people finished. Check that. Only 5 people finished. No, 8 got it, I guess. No.
8, suppose.
Yeah, 8 looks like it. So there we go. Wow. See, that's it. That's marbles.
Okay.
That's fun. It's just silly. Look, it's completely
It's really silly.
It's silly, but it's man, there are channels on Twitch that are dedicated just to this. It is amazing that that's the case. So, let's see. Go back to the menu and we will see where we ended up. So, if we look, we go to the leaderboard, we go to local points, top 3 remain. Notice the eliminations, meaning you didn't finish the race. So nobody has multiple wins. So it looks like us, Technically Blind, Jowser, still on the podium. But yeah, so there you go. That's it. But everybody who at least is entered is on the leaderboard. So top 35 right now. We're going to do this every stream at the end because it's silly and it's fun and it's just a thing. I love it. Once we got into, once I saw this started, it's the first time I saw it. At the end of one of the poker streams, they did a marble race, and I was fat. I was like, this is just awesome. I love this. It's a fun way to, yeah. So anyway, it's silly, but yeah. So that's it. That's us. Thanks everybody for watching. Thanks for hanging out with us for the chat. Certainly appreciate it. If you did enjoy it, remember to follow here on Twitch. If you're on YouTube still, hi, sorry. Hopefully you enjoyed watching it. Martin's bored to tears. We're going to go. All right, Edward, Martin, y'all take care. I'll be back tomorrow, 18xx all day. All you can eat. We'll see y'all later. Take care, everybody. Whew.
Good.
Good stuff.